Hi everyone, I'm your host, Arlen Schumer, and welcome to one of my pop culture presentations. Get ready to be both educated and entertained, what I call edutainment. And when you're done, please be sure to click the subscribe or follow button on your platform screen to be notified of all of my upcoming pop culture presentations. This is a video of the storyboard for that incredible opening animation for Batman the Animated Series that debuted in the fall of 1992. I remember seeing that opening at the San Diego Comic Convention that summer and being blown away by it. Let's take a closer look at that opening and that storyboard, and you'll see that everything in the design and illustration of this opening paves the way for the incredible final animation that they made. Everybody loves the Batmobile, especially this version. You can see once again how the finished image relates to the original. You can really see the influence of Anton Furst's design, the late, great Anton Furst, of the first Batman movie in 1989. Everybody remembers that Batmobile. But we love the graphicness of these very first images that we all saw at whatever point in our lives. The stylization, the Batman in our consciousness that we kind of knew existed, but had never really seen, certainly not in animated form. Look at these beautiful storyboards. And that visage, that ultimate square-jawed characterization, the stylized giant white eyes, realized in the finished animation like this, on screen for maybe a split second. Again, the stylization. Of course, the Batarang throw. Not often utilized, but really beautifully done. You like that little GIF or GIF, however you want to pronounce it? These are the beauties that you find on the internet when you're putting together a presentation like this. But here's my favorite part of the storyboard, is how it shows the movement, the leap, and again, the graphic eyes resulting. Let's see that again. It's beautiful. The leap, the stylization, everything about it. Okay, one more time. I know it's too good. Too good. We could just watch this pretty much for a while. That, of course, leads to, again, look at the stylization of the city, skyscrapers, the lighting. Again, beautifully realized from the storyboard. Look at the arrow directions in the first two top panels. where really you get the feeling of movement in both the flying fist and Batman's graphic silhouette, bringing us, of course, to the dramatic conclusion, the great lightning blast, lightning strike. Look again how closely the sketch becomes the finished cell art. From drawing, beautiful silhouette, to the final cell painting that was animated. There's the cell, and you can tell by its background. That's what we're going to look at tonight, folks. The behind the scenes, the art of what I believe many Bat-aficionados consider to be the best Batman the animated series. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arlen Schumer. I did a book about comic book history in the 1960s, the Silver Age of comic book art, all about how I think the work of the 8 men in this table of contents are the same way we look back on the great Renaissance masters, the human figure of 500 years ago. So too do I believe that 500 years from now, we'll be looking back on the work of these men as our great masters of the human figure and comic book art. There's my preface, kind of explaining why I did the book, and centered in the text is an illustration that I did. I hope it doesn't come true, where I'm a bagman in Times Square dressed up as Superman in a very Christological positions out, we say, with comic books littered, saying to the whoever will listen, why comic books are books, comic books are art, comic books are graphic design. Why won't you listen to me? Feel like it's been something I've been doing my whole career. This was done originally as the back page of the graphic design trade magazine print. Unfortunately, no longer in print. It only exists online now. But every month they would give this design scene column to a different artist, graphic designer, and whatever they wanted to do. That's what I chose to do. A couple of years before, I had convinced Print Magazine in the fall of 1988, it got published, the entire issue devoted to the explosion of creativity that was going on in comics in the 1980s. And I designed the cover. You can see the window pane of a comic book page and the primary colors and the letters COMICS. And the article that I wrote, and I was in such august company, Art Spiegelman wrote an article, and so many other great people. I did the article essentially on where mainstream comic book art, which is mostly in superhero comics, had been going. So I had developed a relationship with Print Magazine in the 80s. And then in 92, when I saw the creation of animator Bruce Timm on a preview at the San Diego Comic Convention, I was so blown away by what I saw that I convinced Print Magazine to let me do an article about it. And they agreed. That article would be printed in the spring of 93 as Wayne's World. I don't think that was my title. I think the editor chose it. But hey, you know, it was 1993. But I was really, you know, proud to have been able to really put into print all the things I was seeing in the stylization that I felt was both classically familiar and brand new. When I say classically familiar, I mean the classic 1940s Superman cartoons that were produced by the Fleischer Studios. The Fleischers, Max and Dave, who had done Popeye and Betty Boop. Well, if you've never seen the 17 cartoons that their studio put out between 1941 and 43, they're simply the greatest realistically animated cartoons, superhero or otherwise, ever done. On the same level as the great Disney funny animal animation are these Superman cartoons. And I immediately saw the influence in the Batman animated series. Now, previous to the 92 series, the first time Batman was animated was here. I remember I was 7.5 years old when this thing went on the air. And when I saw the animation, part of me was kind of hoping the show would be full animation like Johnny Quest. But you can see how the animated series in 92 was a whole different vision of Batman. But when I said classically familiar, I could tell right away that they were also paying homage to the great comic book artist, the thinking man's comic book artist, Alex Toth, who by the 1960s had started to work for Hanna-Barbera full time after multiple decades in comics before that. But yes, he designed Space Ghost in '66. Basically, the directive was Batman in outer space. This was the original design for Space Ghost. And here's more of the finish that we all know and love. Toth, of course, went on to design Batman in animated form for the Super Friends. You can see that would go on air in '73. And this is kind of what it ended up looking like. But yeah, there's the animated series. And in my article in print, I wanted to show and tell why I believe that the genius of the animated series was how deftly it combined elements of so many of the great Batman graphic artistic depictions, starting with, of course, the very first by Bob Kane in 1939. That image is taken from this classic panel in Detective Comics number 27. Moving left to right, we get Bob Kane's first ghost artist, anonymous artists who weren't allowed to sign their name, but that's the great Jerry Robinson, who would go on to have a lifelong legendary career in comics. That's sort of the 1940s. As we move towards the decade of the 50s, the great Dick Sprang, another ghost artist, even though Bob Kane's signature was always there, we knew who this artist was even before DC Comics ever officially credited him. But he really straddles the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. He's really the Batman artist of the 1950s. Then, of course, we get the great graphic Frank Miller, who in 1986 really changed the game with The Dark Knight. And we can talk about The Dark Knight, of course, a little later on. But right after Miller does The Dark Knight, one of my favorite versions of Batman is David Mazzucchelli's very real, in a new way, vision of Batman. This was a full-page ad in DC Comics. I wish they had printed it in black and white. like they did. Here's how it looked like in color. It's still great, but Mazzucchelli's work in black and white is just gorgeous. And then we get a little bit of this guy's vision of Batman on the left, somewhere in the Batman animated series Batman. That would be the great Steve Rude, who, as you can see by the date, June 1989, before the Batman animated series ever, was a glimmer in anyone's eye, was doing this very sort of primal, almost primitive version of Batman, getting him ready for his 1990 crossover with Superman. This is just a fully painted cover, and the interiors are line art, but his vision of Batman is definitely part of the influence of the animated series version. Now, why do I have a Russian constructivist poster there by, is that El Lissitzky maybe? But yeah, I immediately in the red, black, and white color scheme saw the influence right from the opening of Batman the Animated Series. And this recurring motif of the red sky, the white moon, and the black Batman is lifted right from the Russian constructivist palette. And in these pieces of production art by the series creator, I believe these might be all Bruce Timm, the creator of Batman the Animated Series, but you have to love the stylization, the chiaroscuro, black and white graphicness, and just the decision to go with this very primary color scheme. So Bruce Timm, before the animated series, was an animator working in Warner Brothers Animation in their Los Angeles / Hollywood, wherever they are over there on the West Coast. And he was actually working on Tiny Toons adventures in the 1980s. Well, in 1989, the Batman movie, the first one with Michael Keaton as Batman, directed by Tim Burton, is a smash hit. And the directive for Warner Brothers is to do an animated version because of the success of the Burton film. Well, Bruce Timm had been posting around his cubicle sketches that he'd been doing, I think, for a bunch of years, of how he saw Batman if he were ever to animate him. And you can see in these early sketches are more exaggerated versions of the more streamlined vision that would be the finished version Tim would put forth. Again, early sketch from his cubicle. You can see his blue pencil marks here and his very stylized inking, which again would become more finalized in this beautiful graphic distillation of Batman's essence. Well, Gene McCurdy, the producer, who I think had been given the directive to create this animated series, saw all of these sketches around Bruce Timm's cubicle. And next thing you know, there's Gene McCurdy with Tim, Eric Radomski, who would really give the look of the series that we're going to talk about, the backgrounds, the dark deco. And there's producer Alan Burnett, who I'm Facebook friends with, and I'm hoping is at this webinar. But basically, McCurdy gave Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski the green light to produce a presentation reel of how they would handle Batman. Well, this is like giving candy to a baby or presenting somebody with a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. To be a Batman fan that Tim was, and be able to put his vision in animated form. And this is what they produced. I love that last shot of this very one point perspective to the extreme stylized city shot with the peak of the red sky in the background. Yeah, the red sky was obviously a decision from the get-go of Timm and Radomski to really brand their Batman right from the get-go. You can see, sorry for this low resolution close-up, but I really wanted to show you how they had this vision of Batman right from the start, very confident and in their extreme stylization of you know, a beloved character that everybody feels proprietary towards. But you can see how confident Timm's, you know, earliest illustrations are, later collected in this beautiful book by one of the writers of many of the animated series episodes, Paul Dini, and beautifully graphically designed by the great Chip Kidd. In this book, you can see that they printed some of the extreme positions Batman was dodging those bullets in. You could see in that presentation reel, it's a more extreme angular vision of Batman that again was a little more rounded out in the finished animated form. And again, you can see the influence of the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons in the stylization of the city backdrops. Here's a scene from the very first Superman cartoon, one of my favorite parts of it, where he holds up a falling skyscraper. In my article for print, you can see how I compared the Superman cartoon imagery to the beautiful Batman animated series. There's a three-dimensional pop-up promotional folder to hand out to sponsors and networks back in 1992 that when I did my interview, I was gifted with. Look at how the Batman pops out on the right side from a plastic kind of frame, not frame, whatever we would call it, holding him up, but beautifully designed three-dimensional pop-up promotion piece. And you can see how the graphic architecture of Gotham City was in Bruce Timm's vision from these earliest presentation pieces. How the very stylized deco-like architecture of Gotham City in finished animated form would look like scenes like this. And you can again see the influence of Anton Furst's architectural designs from the 1989 Batman film that were so integral to the very look of Gotham City. Anton Furst's beautiful drawings, you can see how they were brought to life. You could also see the influence from the legendary, you know, groundbreaking science fiction film, Fritz Lang's 1927 Metropolis, really the father of all modern science fiction. It starts with Metropolis. And here's one of Anton Furst's production drawings of the Gotham City for the '89 film. and you can see the influence of Metropolis. Look at how in early 92, DC Comics, in their Legends of the Dark Knight Batman title, paid homage. You can see in the text there, Gotham City Visions by Anton Furst. So remember, this is coming out as Timm and company are preparing the debut season of the series. There's another Anton Furst drawing and how it was used in the other homage paying issue to Anton Furst designs. The other big influence on Timm and company, Eric Radomski, architecture wise, would be the work of this man from the 20th century, really one of the visionaries. Hugh Ferris would put together a portfolio of his vision of the metropolis of tomorrow. Again, the word metropolis coming from Fritz Lang's film. Siegel and Schuster used it for Superman. But Ferris was doing these drawings and paintings, I believe, in the 1930s. There's a look at how big some of his skyscraper paintings were. And if you look at the image that he's working on, the painting that he's working on, and you can see that it's just another version, more concrete, of one of my favorite of Hugh Ferris's image. Just the idea of the single man on the landscape and the looming, ghostly, spectral city, you know, the Titanic spires. And you can see the influence on Radomski and Timm's backgrounds for Batman the Animated Series. You know, they just added that red sky again to kind of brand it as theirs. And you stick Batman in front of it like Timm did, and voila, you have the essential look of Batman the Animated Series. In fact, Timm would take a Hugh Ferris drawing like this, and in his pitch to do the animated series, he just would add Batman to it and create this piece. So once again, a Hugh Ferris, beautiful graphic building, and a Batman animated series background by Eric Radomski and company, both in drawing form and in the finished cell. Somebody, whether it was Radomski, I'm not sure who, dubbed the look dark deco. And you can get that feeling of dark deco in another one of Ferris's grand images, which might have been, again, influenced by this image from Fritz Lang's Metropolis, the poster for the film featuring the great female robot played by Thea von Harbu. Unforgettable. The influence, of course, on C-3PO. But you can then see how Frank Miller's Dark Knight promotional poster from 1986 paid homage to Metropolis as well. So all of these previous influences had a bearing on Bruce Timm and company in their earliest promotion pieces and Bruce Timm's character designs for Batman, beautifully appreciated in its black and white form. Timm would create pages that I wish we could take the time. I'll dwell on this beautiful page as long as, I don't know, I'm hoping you all agree with me that we can really take the time. Just, you got to love it, whether you know anything about animation or not. It's just incredible learning and teaching pieces that shows you the stamp that Bruce Timm, really, you know, one of our greatest animators of all time, how he put his visual stamp on this animated series, and the consistency of its look and feel from storyboard sketch, the stylization, the decision to make Batman. I mean, in real life, of course, these proportions don't exist, but we loved the I mean, you got to love the square jaw Batman. I mean, you want a square jawed hero. Timm decided, I'll give you the square jawed hero. I mean, it could be taken to an extreme. You forget how stylized some of the earlier Batman animated series visions are. And you can also see the influence from a late 80s Batman artist named Norm Brayfogle, who drew Batman and really put his stamp on him by really making him have that stylization that Timm and company would put in their animated series. Here's a Norm Brayfogle, and the stylization in so many of his images of Batman in the 80s and 90s, with just the eyes and the teeth, very graphic. And once again, you can see the influence on Bruce Timm in the very stylized graphic profile of Batman from this episode. I believe this was The Laughing Fish. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, there's the cape. Timm really understood that the cape is almost, in the words of the great Neil Adams, almost a living thing. And Timm understood that and really made the space and took the time to really have fun with the impossibility of Batman's cape, and yet it doesn't matter, because with Batman, it's all about stylization. And these are just some of the many ways that Timm would portray the beauty of the graphic stylization of Batman's cape. And of course, in addition to head theories, Bruce Timm had cape theories that I, again, wish we could spend more time on, but I'll try to just give you a chance to take in, once again, the pure drawing ability of Bruce Timm here in all of these separate figures of Batman. And once again, their teaching, their learning experiences. Doesn't matter what side of that coin you're on. Nobody learns more than the teacher nor the student. In my article, I tried to show how Timm solved the problem of how do you take one of the greatest realistic depictions of Batman, shown below by the great Neil Adams, who worked on Batman right after the TV show from 1968 to 74, and really created the concept of the Dark Knight that we have today. But Timm understood that you can't, in animation, do all those lines that in realistic comic book art you can control. And Bruce Timm took the essence of the Neil Adams Batman and just, once again, added Alex Toth and stylized it. That image comes from this great Neil Adams Batman cover from 1970, the team up with the World War I German ace. How can that even be possible? But who cares when you've got incredible Neil Adams covers like this? Adams basically took the 1939 Bob Kane original conception of Batman and just, instead of stiff bat wings, drew a more realistic giant cape, and yet kept the stylization. So the combination of realism and stylization, there'd be no Dark Knight today if it wasn't for what Neil Adams did in the wake of the Batman TV show. In 1970, he creates the Man-Bat character, which is still being utilized by DC Comics 50 years later. It also happened to be the very first episode that aired that they previewed at the San Diego Comic Convention, with the beautiful typographic title card, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the beauty of these title cards. On Leather Wings featured this vision of Neil Adams' Man-Bat, very different than Adams' version, because it was designed by one of the great modern comic artists of our time, Kevin Nolan. You can see in these sketches the essence of his version of Adam's Man-Bat, along with some of these beautiful storyboards that he did. These are either Kevin Nolan's or, Bruce Timm and company following the Nolan designs, but you can also see how they paid homage to Neil Adams' original 1970/71 versions of Man-Bat. In 72, this became one of the most classic issues of Batman, certainly one of its greatest covers, beautifully colored, I'm assuming by Neil Adams himself. This gave us the great hairy chest Batman done in a realism that only, of course, Neil Adams was the master of. And standing in the center, looming over him, is the villain that Adams creates with writer Denny O'Neil, named Ra's al Ghul. I believe I might be pronouncing it correctly. Here's his debut image by Adams, and I believe inked by his inker partner, Dick Giordano. But once again, you can see how Timm and company faithfully translated Adams' look, but kept it in the stylization that Timm had established in the series. This great episode features a very faithful dueling with the swords that comes right out of Adams' 1972 classic issue. Batman gets bitten by a scorpion and is left to die in the desert. But of course, Batman doesn't die. He rises like a phoenix from Arizona. Oh, I mean, a phoenix from the ashes. Shout out to you Seinfeld fans. That's a great Frank Costanza line. This is also one of Neil Adams' greatest single Batman drawings. We can, again, take time and study his delineation of light and shadow, his command of anatomy and musculature, and as a cartoonist, knowing how to draw those lines of the sand coming off of his body, that just adds to the sensitivity of this drawing, which Timm and company faithfully translated in their stylized animated form. They couldn't draw all the hair on Batman's chest that Neil Adams would do in this incredible panel from that issue. I mean, once again, you don't have to hear any dialogue, or you can feel Batman's rage. A lot of modern comic book art comes out of drawings like this by Neil Adams in 1972. This episode concludes with the passionate embrace of Batman with Talia, Ra's al Ghul's daughter, the daughter of the demon, which again pays beautiful homage to one of the certainly sexiest panels Batman's ever been drawn in, and only Neil Adams could have pulled it off. But yeah, and how could Adams top this? Well, his last kind of official Batman story of his Batman era was published in the early 1974, and it was Neil Adams Loves Werewolves, and it's a classic Batman versus werewolf story. You almost wish this cover had been a full bleed, but this was adapted as the episode Moon of the Wolf. And then, of course, there was a year before the landmark return of the Joker after multiple years of being out of Batman comics. Adams and writer Denny O'Neil maybe bring back, it could still be the single greatest Joker story because it's the single greatest Neil Adams Joker story. And it's really, to me, the definitive Joker. I think all modern Jokers sort of take off from this 1973 vision. Timm and company did an episode that again pays homage called The Laughing Fish, as well as being a more direct adaptation of another vision of Batman that followed Neil Adams, the 1978 version by writer Steve Englehart and the late, great Marshall Rogers, taken from us in 2007 at the age of, I think, 57, way too young. But yeah, that story was also one of the great Batman animated series adaptations, which brings us, of course, to their version of the Joker. One of the great visions of the Joker, because it again combined elements of so many classic Jokers, starting with Bob Kane and Jerry Robinson's original from Batman #1 in 1940. The 1950s Joker by Dick Sprang, much more exaggerated and cartoony. I think Neil Adams was mostly influenced by Sprang's, since Adams grew up in the 50s reading Sprang's Batman, because he again was able to take that cartooniest and render it at the same time in his hyper-realistic style. And somehow Tim was able to sort of get all of them into his vision of the Joker. Plus, there was, of course, the great voices, starting with the Joker by, yes, Mark Hamill of Star Wars fame was the voice of the Joker. You can see him here surrounded by some of the other great voices. Yeah, that's the great writer Paul Williams of so many great songs. And that's Richard Mall in the background from Night Court, I believe. But why am I centering on that guy? Yeah, that's Kevin Conroy, who would be the voice of Batman. And all I can say, folks, is that I think there's many people who will agree with me. When I first heard Conroy's voice as Batman, that to me just sounded like Batman should sound. And he is so the voice of Batman, it's just hard to really get anybody else better for the role. It was like he reached into our Bat collective unconscious and just pulled out the perfect voice. But all the voices of the characters were unique. You have the Penguin. His visualization was taken from the 1992 series, the 1992 second Batman movie by Tim Burton. I think had an influence on the animated series version because it was in production at about the same time. But it's interesting when you go back to the TV show in '66 and the great Burgess Meredith's vision, it's interesting that some of the early production pieces of Bruce Timm have more of that version, which is really taken from an image from the great Batman artist in the 1960s, Carmine Infantino, the New Look, as it was called, that debuted in 1964. He drew the character until '67, but there's a poster that I think DC put out in the wake of the TV show, inked by his soulmate inker, Murphy Anderson. And then you get my favorite of the Batman animated series villains. That would be Two-Face. And I just love the, once again, simplicity of the idea of splitting up Two-Face in pure black and white terms. Because if you look at the original Two-Face, shown here, illustrated by, I think, Jack Burnley, Two-Face debuts, I think, 1943. I might be wrong on my dates here. But I think the Tim version is so definitive, with, of course, the color blue being the scarred side to kind of go along with the black and white, stand out from the red lips. There's the coin. Finished animation and a Bruce Timm drawing. Which brings us to those beautiful title cards. Whether Tim did these or some of the other artists, I'm not really sure, but you can see how closely the finished art on the cartoon itself resembles the drawings. I mean, every one is just a beautifully designed piece. But speaking of Cat Scratch Fever, that brings us to another of the villains of the show, beautifully handled. It's just Tim just made no wrong decision in each of his choices. I mean, Catwoman lifts right from my favorite version of Catwoman, shown here from the 1943 syndicated strip drawn by Jack Burnley, my favorite Catwoman mask, certainly. Then you get Mr. Zero, the comic book version from, I think, 1958, and how he was interpreted on the TV series by the actor George Sanders, shown here, out of his costume and in his freezing zone. And of course, on the TV series, many actors would portray the villains. That's Eli Wallach after George Sanders. But none of these Mr. Freezes or Mr. Zeros holds a candle, pun intended, to the vision of Mr. Freeze that we would get in the first season of the animated series in the episode Heart of Ice, written by Paul Dini, I believe. But Mr. Freeze is designed by one of the great comic book artists of our time, Mike Mignola. You might know him from his character, his signature character, Hellboy. Yeah, they made a few movies about him. But it's his design that gives the Batman animated series version of Mr. Freeze really just like the best version ever done, because they gave Mr. Freeze a soul that was burning within his freezing environment, based on the fact that he pined for his wife, who was no longer among the living. I didn't say she was dead, because Mr. Freeze, before he became the evil Mr. Freeze, was the good scientist who worked with his wife. And yet she was a casualty of his experiments and was left in a frozen cryogenic state, if I'm saying that word correctly. And he turned to crime to basically get the money for the finances to try to bring his wife back to life. But his plans would always be thwarted one way or the other, with Batman being involved. And we're left at the end of that episode with just our hearts breaking, really, for Mr. Freeze and his situation, which just feels like will never end. And some of the best episodes of the Batman animated series are the Mr. Freeze episode, like this one, Deep Freeze. And then during the run of the series from 92 to 95, Tim and company would somehow find the time to put out direct to video, or however they were actually presented at first, 90-minute, or no, well, I guess 1 hour long, maybe somewhere between an hour and 90 minutes, more theatrical length versions. So Sub-Zero, they produced with Mr. Freeze. And every now and then, Tim would pop in to DC Comics to draw a cover of their spin-off series like Batman Adventures. And that shows you the graphicness of Mr. Freeze. It also shows you the influence on Tim from the 1980s series and the independent from Canada, Mr. X. Man, maybe one day I'll do a webinar just on the impact that these early 1980s issues of the adventures of this character, shall we say, let loose on the streets of what did they call Mr. X's? Synthopolis or something like that. But you can see how the designs of Hugh Ferris were also influential on Dean Motter, the creator of Mr. X, his artist partner, Paul Ravoche. Both of these guys are from Toronto, I think. And you can see how their vision of Mr. X had to be an influence on the younger Bruce Timm, who would bring that. Even the red, black, and white color scheme was the debut issue of Mr. X, #1, used for the cover of this collected edition. But this was the cover of issue 1, which I believe came out in either late 83 or early 84. The other striking thing about Mr. X is that when you opened up the covers, there would not be your usual comic book openings. There'd be these double-page spread, very typographic, graphically designed opening spreads that would really give the series a distinct look. I mean, Gene Motter really designed the hell out of these things, and they're just real beautiful. And you can see, once again, the influence on Timm's decision to do these graphic title cards. Shadow of the Bat and Batgirl Returns. Yeah, I didn't like these characters in the comics. I certainly didn't like the television version. I didn't like the fact that they went with this purple and yellow color scheme when the 1967 Carmine Infantino original, created in response to the William Dozier, the producer of the TV series, asking DC Comics after Batman debuted in January of '66, we need more female characters. So editor Julius Schwartz and Carmine Infantino came up with a new version of Batgirl in '66. The first issue would have a date of January '67, but that means it came out in the fall of '66, probably created by Infantino in the summer. But there again, we could see how Timm went back to the original for his stylized version of Batgirl, and a character that I never really liked. Once again, I just felt that Timm just never made a wrong decision, even in the more, what I felt were cornier, campier aspects of Batman. I prefer Batman as a solo character. But speaking of solo characters, who are those two characters in the background of this Batgirl Adventures cover by Bruce Timm? Yes, that would be the creations Harley and Ivy, which would be distinct, leave a distinct impression from the series. There's the first Harley Quinn, the former psychiatrist who would become a little mentally deranged and become the love interest, partner, aide de camp, gal Friday. Insert your BFF like descriptive here for the relationship between the Joker and Harley. But this is a real collector's item. Dini teams up with Timm to do a, it's not quite a graphic novel. It's really what back in the day we would call an annual. But the story Mad Love really shows off Bruce Timm's ability. Gee, if he had never gone into animation, I think he would have been a pretty great comic artist. And he really is. Whenever he decides to do comics, they're just really classic. But along with Poison Ivy, you get this sort of, pre-lesbian chic, very kind of, we love Harlan and Ivy. What can I say? And yeah, like I said, Bruce Timm, I think he's got a collection out of just his naughty girl art, but that's a side of Timm that he feels free to explore. Here is a mid-run, what's the date of that? 02. So this is done by Timm in homage to a lot of the characters from the series. Remember I said during the run of the series, they produced some theatrical versions. This actually played in the movie theater for like a week. But you can find it, of course, on DVD. A lot of Bat-aficionados consider this the best of the Batman films, and many like it as the kind of best version of the Batman animated series. I'm not as big of a fan. I really think none of the movies that they made off of the animated series I felt were better than any of the individual episodes, like take Almost Got 'Em, which is unique because it features the rogues gallery that Tim and company had come up with, classic villains and new ones they created for the series. Was Killer Croc out of the comics, or was he created for the series? Oh, I got to brush up on my details, but they're all talking about all how different ways that they almost got Batman, and they go through flashbacks and recollections. But then by the time we get to the end of the episode, they realize that one of the hoods who's been listening to their raconteuring, all you need to know from Tim and company is that square jaw and those eyes. That in itself became a graphic signpost for Batman the Animated Series, to the point where Tim would illustrate covers like this and really break Batman's iconic visage down to its pure graphic elements. And perhaps he was thinking of some of the great Batman head images in comic history, like this one by Adams' partner, Dick Giordano. Usually would ink Adams, but could also pencil and ink his own work. But he had been inking Adams' Batman for so long that his work began to take on the look, never more so in this kind of landmark story by Batman writer Denny O'Neil. No Hope in Crime Alley really established the legend of Batman's origin taking place in Crime Alley, the murder of his parents. And Tim and company adapted the story essentially to their version in this graphic title. I love it. Appointment in Crime Alley, with the classic black, red, and white color scheme as well. So that's a great episode. I mean, there's 95 episodes, I believe. I'm giving you my favorites. Maybe my single favorite might be POV, point of view, which is a Rashomon-like story of where Commissioner Gordon and I think the lawyer for the policemen's union is interrogating three of Commissioner Gordon's lieutenants and sergeants about what happened on that night in question. And interesting characters like the female Montoya, a nice early inclusion of somebody from that demographic that we had never really seen in animation before. But this particular episode has some really incredible images of Batman, some of the best in the entire series, that really show you Tim's approach to the character at its best. There's a fire during the episode, and that affords us some incredible images like this one at the end of the scene. Now, did I say that was my single favorite episode? No, I was wrong. It's this one, Perchance to Dream. Now, people who know me know I'm a Twilight Zone aficionado as well. There's a great Twilight Zone episode from the first season. It's the first one by the great writer Charles Beaumont. I think it's episode 9. It's also called Perchance to Dream, with the great Richard Conte in the lead role. But what makes this Tim and company paying homage to this version of Perchance to Dream is that they're both about the essential nature of what is reality. What is the difference between a dream and reality? How can Bruce Wayne be interacting with himself? That's what drives this episode, is that we, the audience as well, are wondering how could this be? How could they be two separate beings? And the vision of Batman in this episode, this kind of dark, slightly sinister Batman, is really chilling. And it turns out, of course, that it is all a dream. It's a dream induced by the animated series version of the Mad Hatter, voiced by the great Roddy McDowall, I believe. The Mad Hatter, you might remember from the TV series, played by David Wayne. But I should have dwelled on this a little longer. The point of this episode was the Mad Hatter induced a dream into Batman when he captured him that made Batman believe he was living a reality in which he did not become Batman, that Batman was a separate person, a separate entity, a reality in which his parents were not killed. It was the Mad Hatter thinking he could do away with Batman once and for all by giving him the answer to his dreams, that his parents were not killed, that he would not have to have the burden of being Batman. Well, you can tell by that smirk on Batman's face that he had bested the Mad Hatter and realized he had to embrace his reality. So yes, now I wanted to go on to, you might remember the Mad Hatter from the TV show. Speaking of the TV show, everybody's favorite Adam West was the voice of one of the most memorable episodes of the animated series, and that would be the team up with Batman's influence in the series, the Gray Ghost. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a pop culture expert to know that they were paying homage to the great pulp character, the Avenger, the Shadow, painted here by George Rosen, I believe, who painted so many of the great 1930s pulp covers. They were called pulps, text-heavy magazines with single illustrations interspersed without. But yeah, you can see the influence that the Shadow had on Batman and on the Gray Ghost. But yeah, because they actually got Adam West to do the voice, it's one of the memorable episodes as well. Midway through the run of the animated series, there were decisions from on high to rebrand the series, and it went through a couple of name changes. Here's the graphic for the Adventures of Batman and Robin. Once again, I never liked Robin, but the version Bruce Timm and company gave us, I could accept. Like I said, every decision that Tim made, even on the characters that I don't care for, was just the right creative decision. There was nothing stupid or goofy, but really it was the redesign or the revamping or slightly remodeling of the Batman character himself midway through the series that really excites me, because rarely in anything over the course of numbers of years does something get better. It usually declines, just like athletes as they age. But man, the Batman animated series just kept getting better as it went on. You could see the difference from Tim's earliest vision and the more Japanese influenced. And this also results from Tim working with different animators as well. So many names that I don't have the time to go into, but here's the how this new improved graphic vision of Batman, of course, it would come complete with Tim's classic notes, which once again, I wish we could spend the time on, but you got to just love everything about these beautifully drawn teaching and learning experiences. They're just so beautiful. Once again, we can spend time just enjoying everything that's both written and drawn here. Folks, you know, you can learn a lot from studying these incredible pieces. Yeah, 1997. Yeah, in this later stage of the animated series, the cape would become even more of a just beautiful graphic element. And Batman was just reduced down to just black and gray with just a touch of the slightly yellow utility belt. One of the series' last great episodes was called Legends of the Dark Knight, which really was based on a comic story written by Frank Robbins, art by, again, Dick Giordano, about a bunch of kids at a campfire that each take turns describing their idea of what Batman looks like and the type of character Batman is. And this is faithfully translated by Timm and Company in this episode. And one of the versions of Batman that they encounter looks like this. And it's Timm and Company paying homage to the 1950s Dick Sprang Batman. This is actually an homage painting. He made it, I circa 1990, maybe. I think he passed away in 95. So, but yeah, that's the 1950s Batman with the barrel chest and stylized Robin and all the characters. And you can see how the homage is paid there in the series. And of course, the villain, the Joker, you can see is also taken from Sprang's original version. And though the Joker might seem in this sequence to have the upper hand, eventually Batman and Robin triumph. And I love how they also pay homage to the great closing scene from the TV series animation right before it would lead to the graphic. One of my favorite things about the TV series is the graphic. And that kind of brings us to the end of the Batman animated series when it had run its course. But Timm wasn't finished with Batman. During the run of the series, he prepared for, I think this ran right after the animated series, or did it overlap? I'm not sure. But Batman Beyond was his idea of a Batman of the future kind of concept. You could see that the graphic simplicity was there in some of Timm's earliest drawings for the Batman animated series, and how he would adapt them to this Batman Beyond futuristic character. And you can see, again, Timm would always dip his hand into the DC Comics cover sweepstakes and drop a beautiful image when you least expected it. So I never cottoned to this Batman Beyond except for one thing, and that's the direct-to-video 90-minute cartoon, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. Now, ostensibly, it's about, of course, the Batman Beyond character confronting, I think it's son of the Joker. But what makes this video a must-have double bag item is that within the episode, there's like a 25-minute flashback sequence to, in a sense, Batman the Animated Series. And it involves Robin being held captive by the Joker, being tortured, being basically almost given, for all intents and purposes, a lobotomy. And it's so striking in its downbeat ending that it must be seen to be believed. It might be, in its own way, the single greatest episode of Timm's Batman animated series is this episode within Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. And then there were the series that followed Timm's animated series that both paid homage and struck off in new directions, like Batman the Brave and the Bold. Now, this is basically paying homage to the comic book of DC Comics called Brave and the Bold that would team up Batman with a different DC Comics character every month. And so too did the animated version. Really was a potpourri of all of the Batmans of all timelines, and really having fun with it, as you can see in this artistic promotion piece. But maybe my single favorite episode is the one that unites Batman with Space Ghost somehow. And obviously it's a wish fulfillment because, like I showed you at the beginning of this webinar, how much of an influence Space Ghost had on Timm's Batman animated series to begin with. Also, Timm and Company would produce, after the animated series ended its run, a couple of these 90-minute movies. This actually is my favorite, Mystery of the Batwoman. I think the animation is the best. The images of Batman are the best. Anyway, in the 21st century, Timm and Company would go on to produce standalone, direct-to-video animated versions of some of Batman's comics' greatest hits. First and foremost, of course, The Dark Knight, the 1986 Frank Miller written and illustrated image that really gives us the Batman we have today. We're living 30 plus years later in the shadow of The Dark Knight. But you can see how Timm got that bulkiness of Miller's Batman in his stylization. If you look at Miller's Batman from Dark Knight when he's in the Batmobile tank, the stylization of the technology in this memorable panel is simplified but echoed in the animation, in the animated version, which utilizes the classic red, black, and white color scheme. One of the animators who worked on this and with Bruce Timm is the late, great Darwin Cooke, like Marshall Rogers, taken from us at circa also the age of, I think, 57, a couple of years ago. If you don't know his work, seek it out. It's classic in its stylization. But he broke on the scene after the animated series in 1998, I believe, with his standalone graphic novelette, is really the best way to describe it, called Batman Ego. So Cooke arrived on the comic book scene fully born with his mature style. And he really went on to become one of our greatest modern superhero comic artists. So it's a real tragedy that he was taken from us way too soon, but he left behind an incredible body of work. So Timm and Company animated a lot of Cooke's work. There was the adaptation of the Frank Miller written and Dave Mazzucchelli Batman Year One. If you remember that drawing that I liked, that I showed you at the beginning, that DC made the house ad out of. Again, you can see that the Timm version is faithful to the 1988 comic book original, one of the memorable Mazzucchelli covers. And you can see how the animation would pay homage and really bring Mazzucchelli's art to life. If you haven't seen this version, Batman Year One, the animated version, you really should get it because it's really the most faithful, I think, to the art in the comic. But then again, there's the version that they did a couple of years ago of the Brian Boland illustrated and Alan Moore written The Killing Joke, another defining modern graphic novel of Batman's that's become influential on all the movies since. Some of Boland's greatest panels were brought to life in Timm and Company's version that I think was very faithful to the comic book version. And then there were the versions of Batman that came out in the wake of the Batman animated series, like this one. This ran for a couple of seasons. I gave it a try. I didn't really like it. I think this is in the early 2000s. And it was just called The Batman. But you can see how the big eyes, very Japanese influence, also kind of keeps the Bruce Timm tradition. Now, this version of Beware the Batman was done on computer. And this aired about, I'm going to say 8 years ago or so. And at first I was put off by the computery look of it, but man, the more I watched it, the more I liked it. And I really regret that. I think it only ran for one season. But again, if you haven't seen it, I would seek it out and give it a chance. I think you'll enjoy it. And you can see again how it paid homage to Timm's version, which has remained evergreen. Timm hasn't stopped working on Batman. I think for the character's 75th anniversary, is that 2014? He produced a new Batman animated short. And now in this iteration of Batman with the very long pointy ears, Timm returns to one of Bob Kane's earliest visualizations of Batman's cowl. This is from, I think, a one-panel ad for Batman and Detective Comics. That's how early this is. Like, this predates, I think, Detective number 27. And there you can see Timm's version both incorporates his earliest versions with the square-jawed Batman, but also brings us this kind of primal version. And here's what he produced.
Be careful, you fool! I need every drop of her precious blood for my experiment. Now take her inside. I'm nearly ready for... Wait! What's that sound? Stay back, Batman, or she dies! You don't scare me! Stay back!
Is it over?
For now.
I'm happy to say, oops. Let's go back to that. Didn't mean to give you that little sneak preview, but I'm happy to say that the look of this Batman seems to be the origin or impetus for a new version of Bruce Timm's Batman that is going to be debuting, I believe, either later this year or in 2023. And it's called Batman Caped Crusader. And there's the the release version by Bruce Timm of this version of Batman that I'm really excited about. It's taking that pointy-eared version of Batman that we just saw, the early primal version of Batman, and making him the focus. Now, when I see an image like this, I think of the great Bill Titler's vision of Night on Bald Mountain for Walt Disney's Fantasia. I mean, am I that off base, right? But yeah, so that's something really to look forward to. 30 years later, Bruce Timm returning to the character in the series that made into a classic. Interesting that this new version of a live action Batman that just came out, The Batman, directed by Matt Reeves, decided to go with the classic red and black color scheme that would earmark Batman, the animated series, as being the best Batman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just end this webinar with some kind of addendum images, like seeking out the complete animated series on DVD. I happen to be lucky to say that I own this slipcase edition that for me is the definitive set. I think they've since released it on Blu-ray, and there's probably multiple ways you can get this. Folks, if you go to my website, arlenschumer.com, you'll see my comic book history page that highlights my book, The Silver Age of Comic Art, and how you can get a signed and sketched in version by me. You can see how my book really is about the art, and how I take out the original word balloons and put the artist talking about the art. That's Ditko and Spider-Man on top, and Carmine Infantino's Flash. In my book, I highlight Infantino's Batman in this spread of some of his most classic images, as well as this kind of greatest hits of so many of the covers that he became most famous for. In the Neal Adams chapter, I give you in one spread images from a single issue that Adams does in 1969, the team up with Sergeant Rock for you Bat-aficionados. But in Adams' own words in the text, you can learn a lot about his approach to what really rescued Batman from the shambles of the TV show. And yet Adams could also be sensitive with Batman in panels like this. One of my most favorite that I created a Facebook group around, Neal Adams Almanac. So if you're on Facebook, friend me, come join my group. I also run one on Jack Kirby and one on the Silver Age itself. I've been drawing Batman since I was a kid. This is when I was 12 years old. I decided to just, with a fountain pen, draw my version of the origin of Batman. Don't ask me how, but when I was in high school, I became a kind of art director of the Batmania fan magazine, being produced by some fan up in Massachusetts. But yeah, so this is me at like 17 years old, maybe. How about this double page spread pinup? Where I'm learning how to use brushes and India ink. But, you know, all along, I'm trying to do my best Neal Adams. I mean, there's that Sergeant Rock team up that I took all that great art from. But here's my cover for Batmania when I was 18 years old. And you can see how I'm really trying to do my best. My art's improving, actually, I guess, for a teenager. But I'm trying to do my take on Neal Adams' Batman. Look at his thumbnail sketch for that great spread that I would end up using as the title page for my book on Neal Adams sketches. If you've never seen this book, it's really, I think, the best sketchbook by an artist, because all the text is Adams talking about the sketches themselves. It's one of many Batman Adams projects that I've done over the years, interviews with him in various trade magazines. He was the biggest influence on my own illustration doing comic book art for advertising in magazines. One of my specialties is turning people into superheroes. You see on the upper right there, that's John Ledger or Leger. He's the CEO of T-Mobile and happens to be a big Batman fan. So I turned him into Batman. About a year ago for City and State magazine, they wanted Cy Vance turned into Two-Face, one of Batman's great villains, because they saw him being two-faced on various major issues. I've always tried to do knockoffs of Batman and Robin when I'm given the chance. So for Washington Post magazine, a story about a comic book artist who's blind and how he draws his comics with the aids of his seeing eye friend. Of course, I was totally paying homage after Infantino and Anderson, the great 1966 pinup that they did, that DC Comics would produce as a mini poster. I also paid homage to Infantino and Anderson when I turned Howard Stern's Stooges, maybe is a loving term for Sal Governale and Richard Christie. And when I produced this image and gave it to him, they invited me up to the studio because I gave them a poster-sized image of it. So you gotta love it, right? But yeah, I'm paying homage to Batman my whole career. Classic Infantino cover from '66. In the wake of the TV show, boy, you talk about meta. How about Batman and Robin watching themselves on TV? Years later, Entertainment Weekly magazine would ask me to do an image of Batman watching his movies. I had to pay homage to that Infantino cover, right? But yeah, for Entertainment Weekly, which by the way, just ceased publication after decades. Oh, well. But every now and then I was given the chance to actually draw Batman and with his buddy Superman there. I also got to do a three-dimensional greeting card in the style of the Batman animated series. Now, what do I mean by three-dimensional greeting card? Well, that's the flat art I produced. And here's a picture of the actual folded out pop-up card for the company Pop Shots. This is the now defunct Words and Pictures Museum in Northampton, Massachusetts, that was run by one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle guys with all the money that he made. Opened the museum in Northampton. And in 1998, for the 60th anniversary of Batman, they had an exhibition, and I contributed a series of panels called The Graphic History of Batman. You can see them hanging. They were 54 inches by 27 inches, covering all the different eras of Batman's history in words and pictures. There's the panel that I did for Batman the Animated Series. There were 10 of these. Now you can see in this early panel the influence of Leonardo da Vinci on Bob Kane's conception of Batman comes from that very first appearance in May of '39. But right after Kane died in 1998, I got to thinking about interviews he had given with his writer partner, Bill Finger, about the very first sketch Kane did of Batman. And I set out, no sketch has ever been published or produced, but it was described. And I set out to illustrate it based on both Kane's and Finger's depictions. And I ended up creating this collage around it of all of the influences that writer Bill Finger told Bob Kane about that would turn Batman into the Batman we know. He pulled out the dictionary on top there and showed Bob, the illustration of the bat to make his cowl more bat-like. That collage became the cover of the trade magazine of comic history, Alter Ego, in 1999. I've since taken that image and created articles and lectures about it. I call Bill Finger the man who made Batman, Batman. In the wake of all of this in the 21st century have come many plays and shows about the unsung co-creator of Batman, like this play by Rhode Islander Lenny Schwartz, co-creator, and I did the poster for it. And then for director-writer Roberto Williams out of Brooklyn, a couple of years ago, I did Fathers of the Dark Knight, showing you my love of type and my joy to be able to illustrate Batman every now and then, as you can see here. But yeah, I'm always trying to do my take on Neil Adams' Batman. What can I tell you? Anyway, if you haven't seen the Hulu documentary that was made a couple of years ago, it really is pretty brilliant. Most of all, it has a happy ending that Bill Finger winds up with some measure of co-creator credit. And spoiler alert and full disclosure, I am in this documentary for about 45 seconds, but I do get to say my piece. They interviewed me for like an hour, of course, but I'm really proud to be a part of a really great documentary, beautifully made, expertly shot and directed. And you should really see it if you haven't. I've since done many multimedia live lectures before the pandemic, like this one in 2019 on the 50th anniversary of Neil Adams' Batman. Every year I do a live lecture or now webinar on the 50th anniversary of the thing I love to hate, the Batman TV series. On my website, if you go to my visual lectures and webinars page, you can get links to my YouTube channel where I post all of my latest webinars, and my past live lectures are there. And then the ones that the lawyers for YouTube flag for my use of copyrighted music wind up on my Vimeo channel. You can see anything that's really branded: James Bond, Bruce Springsteen, Twilight Zone. And you can see there at the bottom right, that was my 25th anniversary live lecture I did to celebrate the Batman animated series. This webinar version is just a new, improved, updated version of what I did 5 years ago, and now to celebrate really the 30th anniversary of the series. Next week, folks, we go from Batman to Superman. Every Wednesday in March and into April, I'll be doing a webinar at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This one called Warhol Superman. If you don't know the relationship of Andy Warhol in his career to some very significant works involving Superman, then tune in next week. I continue to do webinars for New York Adventure Club every now and then. They're a $10 ticket, but it allows you to watch a recording of the webinar for up to a week afterwards if you can't make it live. And if you don't know the work of Vivian Maier, tune in for that, because I do believe she is the greatest photographer of the 20th century. Speaking of the 20th century, the David Letterman Show celebrated its 40th anniversary this year. It debuted in February 1st, 1982. And recently, the photographer of the bumpers, as they're called, the images that you see when you go in and out of commercial, a beautiful coffee table book. Now, why am I showing this? Because I'm doing a webinar about the late night bumpers, because I was a young graphic designer working on the show in the early 80s after I got out of Rhode Island School of Design. So I would be given a Mark Carson photograph, and I would illustrate the type that would make it look like it was actually happening on the scene when Carson photographed it. But nope, I had to make it look like it was there. Maybe this is one of my favorites. I think it's shot at Coney Island, of course. But yeah, being able to do that combination of type was a fun one. In the webinar, I'll also show some of the other graphics I did that were on the air with Letterman, like The Adventures of Frank and Fred. So if you go to the events blog page on my website, I always post my comings and goings, along with all the URL links that you need. So thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for attending this webinar about the best Batman the Animated Series. And I hope to see you on the next one. Bye-bye. Thanks for attending this presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. And please remember to click the subscribe or follow button on your platform screen to be notified of all of my upcoming pop culture presentations. And visit my website, arlenschumer.com, to sign up for my newsletter too. Until next time, I'm Arlen Schumer. Bye-bye.